Hi, everyone. You're tuning in to Radical Good with your host, Rada Friedman. In this video podcast, we're going to explore the question, what will it take to get more resources into the hands of women and girls, especially women and girls of color, women and girls who are queer, women and girls with disabilities, or all of the above? How can we be more intersectional and inclusive? I've spent 2 decades working on gender equality issues all over the world. And the universal truth that I've seen is that when you invest in women and girls, it creates a ripple effect of benefits that spread through her family, through her community, and ultimately through the world. We'll talk with powerhouse women and some male-bodied allies to hear inspiring stories and learn some practical ways that we can use the resources we have at our disposal to advance progress on equality by spending like it matters, giving like it matters, and investing like it matters, so we can really narrow the gender wealth gap. Okay, Stephanie, I'm so excited to be able to talk with you today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here, Rada. You're really sweet to ask.
Yes, I am super excited because you bring a lot of really great and varied experience to this conversation. You've got 20 years experience working in the philanthropic sector. You've done a ton of work in a number of different roles. You've got an incredible background in the arts community. You also are so amazing. Let me just add that the city of Seattle proclaimed October 21st Stephanie Ellis-Smith Day. So I'm now going to celebrate that holiday every year.
Well, technically it was just 1 year, but I'm not going to stop you from celebrating every year if you must.
I will. This is going to be a new holiday for me. I really love it. And one of the other things that I think is really exciting and important to tell listeners about is that you are a CAP, a Chartered Advisor in Philanthropy. And I don't know that everybody knows what that is. So would you mind just telling people what it means to be a Chartered Advisor in Philanthropy?
Yeah, well, essentially it's a designation that was created by the American College of Financial Services, and that's the same organization that gives the CFP, the Chartered Financial Planner designation, maybe CPA, but a lot of these letters that you see after people's names who were in the financial sector, some insurance sector. And not too long ago, I'd say maybe 7 to 10 years ago, they created this CAP, Chartered Advisor in Philanthropy, as a way to kind of create an overall curriculum for people who are advising in philanthropy, and whether they're folks like me and you who specialize in philanthropy, and that's essentially all we do, or if they are trust and estates attorneys or financial advisors, and they really want to still have that as a part of their practice. It's kind of a foundational course of like everything that everyone is saying that is standardized. So that's essentially what it is, and it's a 9-month program to receive it. And it's really helpful, and it also kind of creates the sort of unified way of kind of looking at the field and bringing more people into it. So I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I just thought it would be helpful for everyone to know what it is if we refer to it later in the conversation. And I'd love to know a little bit about your journey and what led you here to this work that you're doing in philanthropy. You've had such a varied career, and I would just love to hear a little bit more about how you got here.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. I sometimes think, gosh, I've had this varied career and everything, but as I sort of look back at the things that I've done and the things that I've been involved in and my interests, I realize that there is actually a pretty solid through line through everything, and that is essentially public good and civic betterment. My career actually started in the sciences. When I graduated UCLA, my degree is technically in English, but at the time they didn't give 2 majors, but I was essentially biochemistry and English, and so I was going to be a scientist. And I trained for that. I wanted to be a research scientist, again, because I wanted to study and put information in the field. for human betterment. And so I worked on gene therapy was some of my first things that I did, gene therapy. And then what brought me to the Seattle area was the University of Washington, doing AIDS-related research. And then all these things happened where I ended up deciding that I'm not going to actually go into the sciences. It was just for all these different reasons. It was just like, okay, this is not going to work. And so I ended up having to do this really intense career transition, which was kind of a, those things are very rupturing, right? But then that's how I kind of got into the arts, by just sort of stumbling upon the work of Jacob Lawrence and two art historians. And again, they were looking for a researcher because they were putting together this book called A Catalogue Raisonné, the entire life work of this very famous and well-known African-American artist. And these are prestigious books that art historians put together. And one had never been done for an African-American artist. This was the first one. And they were looking for a researcher. And I was like, well, I mean, I can research, but, I probably don't have any skills that you would be interested in. But it was basically, handling a lot of information, distilling it, and putting it back out to the public. I'm like, well, that's actually what I was doing, but in a completely different way. So that kind of started the ball rolling in the arts, the nonprofit sector. This Catalogue Raisonné project was unusual in that it was actually formed as a nonprofit. So we spent a lot of time, in addition to doing the work, we had to raise funds for the project from collectors. I'm just going to apologize in advance. My allergies are going crazy. I took a Zyrtec, but I'm still sniffling and all this stuff. But anyway, that was sort of my foray, initial foray into the arts, into the nonprofit sector. And then most importantly, thinking about and learning about donors, legacy, and philanthropy, and the different forms that philanthropy can take. That all started with the Jacob Lawrence Catalogue Raisonné project, and that was, 1997 when I started that. Wow. And so it went on from there, and you have my bio, and you've seen the things that happen all after that. But those were the beginnings of it, and that's how I think sometimes, like, when we take a step back and we sort of think about, like, how did all of this fit together? But you realize it kind of does in some interesting and odd way, and that you are, even when you think you're maybe not on your path, you're on your path. It's just maybe a medium that you didn't anticipate, or it didn't look like the path aesthetically that you thought it would be, but you're still kind of on that path. And I guess that's what I learned, that I was still on the path. And I've only recently realized that. So it's kind of gratifying.
I love the way that you said that, because I find that experience, and I think a lot of other people will have that experience as well. It's either that, or people continue down one path and realize, I'm so out of alignment with who I truly am. Somewhere along the way, I went the wrong way, and now I'm going to make an abrupt turn and go in a different direction, and that gets them back. But they're always still on their journey. And I too started my career in the nonprofit sector, and suddenly found myself sort of recruited by a very wealthy philanthropist, and found myself on the other side of the table. So instead of asking for the funds to make the social justice work, I was now in charge of giving the funds for the social justice work. And I think it's so helpful to have had that background, or many nonprofits in both of our cases, in order to understand what that looks like for a philanthropist and to help translate that to them. So as I'm talking, I'm realizing, and there are probably people who are going to be listening who don't even know what a philanthropy advisor is. And you touched on that when you talked about the Chartered Advisor and Philanthropy program. But I think some people might not even know why a philanthropy advisor could be helpful. Do you want to say a little bit about some of the things that it's useful for?
Sure, I'm happy to do that, only if you promise to join me, because we both do this work, and I think we both have a lot to contribute to that answer. But I'm first going to start with a confession. This is like, true confession. And Rod,
I love it.
5 years ago, maybe, I did not know there was such a thing as philanthropy advising. Just straight up, there you go. I did not know. And it turns out I had been doing this work unnamed for a while, but I didn't realize that it was a thing. And that thing essentially is working with people with means, with significant amount of means, to help them do a number of different things. Redeploy their private dollars for the public good. They oftentimes have given in the past, but don't necessarily feel like they're kind of doing it the right way, or it doesn't really feel like it's fulfilling, or they may not feel that it's having the kind of impact that they want to have. And so they're ready to get intentional. They would come to a philanthropic advisor for that. Or maybe they have a foundation, a family foundation already, and they've been kind of playing around with it and making gifts. And then again, they're wanting to get a little bit more intentional. Okay, we've dabbled in this for a while. I think it's time to we need to get organized. Also, another occasion when people may want to work with a philanthropic advisor, maybe it's a couple and they've been fine doing their family foundation or working from their donor advised fund, their DAF, but now their kids are older, maybe in their early 20s, mid 20s, and the kids kind of want to be involved. I'm like, okay, well, we've been doing it our way. How do we all come together and do this, as a unit? You would call a philanthropic advisor for that. There are a number of other ways, scenarios I can think of, but those are, to me, and in my experience, have been some of the more common ones. In addition, I think a really big one, particularly these past 3 to 5 years, there has been an incredible amount of wealth that has been generated from the stock market, from public offerings, buyouts, all of these types of things. And people have been accumulating wealth faster than they've been able to mentally and emotionally process it. Mm-hmm. And once people have a minute to kind of sit down and not just look at their balance sheet, but understand the implications of the balance sheet, I'm like, oh my God, wait, I've been working so much. Not only do I have enough for me and my kids and probably my grandkids, well, I do want to give some of this away, and I really want to be charitable. I don't need all of this. That's been a big one.
Absolutely.
First generation.
Yep. I was just going to say, Bill Gates will say, it turns out it's a lot harder to give money away than it is to make the money itself. Yeah. And there's so much that you talked about that's really important, because there's a huge wealth transfer that's happening on a number of different fronts. The family dynamics are one important piece that I'm so glad you touched on, because if I remember correctly, you're also a 2164 certified advisor. And so the dynamics between the generation that created the funds, then maybe their children, and now their grandchildren are very different. The way that the current generation thinks about how to redistribute resources on the planet and why the 1% owns much of the wealth is radically different than the way that their grandparents think about it. And sitting a family down with all of the politics that come with any family, no matter how much you love each other, it is challenging. And it's really good to have somebody who knows some really tried and true. I'm glad that that's also part of your portfolio of work. And from talking to me that a lot of what I do in the conversations that I have are about how we can think about redistributing resources in a very inclusive way, and really thinking about not just giving to the kinds of efforts that some of our friends have talked about, a 5K for this nonprofit, or donating because my friend asked me to go to her fundraiser, but really strategically thinking about what lights me up inside. What is really important for me? What do I want my legacy to be? It also involves having conversations about how we're thinking equitably about where those resources should go. Who is disproportionately affected by a lot of the suffering on the planet and a lot of the systems that we're never really designed to work equitably. How do we take our power and help to change that? So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you see as why it's so important to think about this or have conversations about why it's important to invest in women and girls, and particularly women and girls of color, or women and girls who are queer or have disabilities, or all of the above.
I think this is a really important topic. It's timely, obviously, because we have been, as a society, been putting a lot of focus and the spotlight on the wrongs that have been done to women, women of color, transgender, gay and lesbian folks who are oftentimes suffering the brunt of the being at the down end of the power dynamic. Mm-hmm. Over the holiday break, I read Ronan Farrow's Catch and Kill about Harvey Weinstein and what these women suffered through. And what's really interesting to me, and this goes back, I'll get to your specific question about focusing on women and girls, but women, the female gender writ large, is half the population. And when you're putting your thumb down on half the population, the idea that you're only creating space for the male writ large gender and they're not suffering too is astounding to me. And just as an example, like just in this book, while of course these women just the things that they had to put up with and that they felt that they had to put up with and do and experience and hear and witness, these men suffering too, but suffering in silence because they feel like, well, this is just kind of the way it is. It's like we are all so much poorer for the way we treat the least of our society. And obviously I say that with full conviction, being a woman myself, being an African-American woman. This country will only be as strong as our weakest members of society. And, maybe I'm a pessimist, or maybe you'd call this being a realist. We're never going to achieve pure equality amongst everyone at all the time. There's always going to be some sort of pecking order. But I sort of feel like where we have allowed ourselves to be now is so unsustainable and so dangerous, because as we're seeing with, why we're doing this via Zoom and we're in the middle of a pandemic, our country is so weakened because there are so many people who have been suffering and who cannot take care of themselves. Chickens come home to roost. And to put money into women and girls, to me, is one of the best kinds of investments that you can make, because this is not to say that every woman does this, but data, studies, anecdotally, we see that when women have access to money or power, they don't only keep it for themselves. They have children. They're often caretakers of people below them and above them and generationally. The money disperses throughout a community. Mm-hmm. Giving money to one is actually giving money to 5. I made up that statistic, but you get my point. I just, a lot of these things, and I've been thinking a lot about this right now, just being cooped up in the house with coronavirus, and how, and just how serious a situation that we're in. Mm-hmm. And I've been thinking about this too with our presidential elections, and it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing to say, and I mentioned it to some other folks, and they laughed and said, well, I thought the same thing too, but I didn't want to say it. We are in such a mess. We are in such a dire mess societally, politically, as a country. I said, I was thinking only a woman can be president next. It's only a woman, frankly. I mean, it's a stereotype. But again, anecdotally, deep inside, we know this. Women women can handle these kinds of things. Women can do more than one thing at a time. They can rebuild economies and nurture a nation.
Yeah.
They can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I was just thinking, you know, the last time we had a terrible economic financial crisis in this country in 2008, when the markets melted down, Elizabeth Warren came in and got us out of that. So it would really be wonderful. It would really be wonderful to have that kind of representation. And especially now that we're in a global pandemic situation, the likes of which have not been seen in a century, it is just a magnifying glass for the inequities.
Absolutely.
And I just wrote an article about this this weekend, because I've been watching all the statistics come in, as I'm sure you have, and they're confirming everything that I already suspected would be true. I was just waiting for the data, and that is, this pandemic is hitting certain people harder than others, and it's women above all that it's hitting first, right? Because they are the caretakers in the families. They are the nurses' aides, the doctors, the elder caregivers. With children home, that burden falls on them as well. They are also the cleaners and the janitors of so many homes and businesses across all of these countries. And so they are on the front lines.
And with very, very little support. This is not work that is rewarded with stability, with pensions, with health insurance. It's grueling, now dangerous, unfinancially rewarding work. And the other brunt of it, and thinking about, you know, what do I think about and what do I worry about most right now with the plight of women, is with our stay-at-home orders and so many people out of work. Domestic violence. Domestic violence is going to be, well, it already has. It already has started as being a really dangerous situation for many women and their children at home, with the stresses, and then being trapped in small places with a dangerous, stressed out, worried man.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So this is something that I've been thinking about and talking with people about as well, in light of the current coronavirus situation that we're all living in. How can people who are thinking about giving use that added lens, use that added gender equity lens and other equity lenses when they're thinking about where to give? Because so many people, right, are going, I don't know where to give. And that's true in general. That's why people have philanthropic advisors like you and me. But right now, I really am thinking especially about why this is so important. And I'm urging people to take a look at campaigns and nonprofits where people are really working on these things. Things like local domestic violence shelters, who absolutely need support right now. Things like the Domestic Workers Alliance, you know, who really need the support to protect workers right now. And one of the clients that I was telling you about a few days ago that works in the menstrual health space and quickly pivoted once they realized there is a critical shortage of medical supplies right now. People desperately need masks in hospitals to fight the infection. And because they had so many people with sewing machines who are working on making menstrual hygiene kits, they pivoted to instead sew masks that they could give to hospitals and medical centers of all kinds. So I'm wondering if you happen to know of any other good resource point people to, or that you might ask them to consider thinking about right now in their giving.
Yeah, you named some great ones. And actually, I wanted to put the Domestic Workers Alliance on my list. On my website, I have a list of COVID resources where people can, it's local, national, and international resources of where people and how people can give, organized by, you know, food service to medical research, the whole 9 yards. But I don't have that on there, the Domestic Workers Alliance, and that is excellent, Rada. So I'm going to add that. But I would also encourage people to really think about the domestic shelters, particularly for battered or abused women, and even homeless shelters and services that service families. Because again, we're supposed to be all sheltering in place right now. If you are living with a dangerous person, where are you going to go? You, even if you had the money to go move into a motel or to a hotel, they're not accepting people now. You can't get on a plane or a bus and travel to distant family. So these service centers are overloaded and they need constant support. I would also consider, nurses unions. Now, this is a little interesting one, and this came up because of a woman who called me, it was about 2 weeks ago, really upset that this was all happening. This is just seeing the mask lifted off of the inequities. And she was also pretty profoundly disturbed about the troubles that nurses were experiencing, that they're working so hard and putting themselves in so much danger at work in hospitals or care facilities, and then having to come home and still continue caretaking, perhaps putting their own children at risk. And I don't know if you saw this, but I think it was the California Nurses Union read, one of the women who contracted COVID-19 read off a long letter to the federal government about how woefully unprepared and unstaffed they were. And this woman heard this letter and was just pretty moved by it. She called me, what can I do? And so we kind of looked up a lot of these nursing unions and places where nurses can get support and care, not just for their direct needs, but for advocacy. So they can actually have a voice to buy the ads to let people know what is happening. Because, there's so much, as you know, there's just so much media noise out there. No one is going to listen to a nurse, but they need space and time to actually be heard. But all of that is to say, your giving, especially right now, may not be tax advantaged. And I would also say to not be afraid of that. Whether we do that, we give like that all the time, supporting family, helping put another kid through private school, another relative or someone's child through private school or college, or supporting our parents. That is philanthropy, and that is giving. When most people think about philanthropy, they think about tax advantage philanthropy, gifts to 501c3 organizations. That may not always be exactly what is needed all of the time. The gifts to the nurses union that she made, that's a 501c5. That's a union. You don't get a tax write-off for that, but it was needed because no one is giving that. So it's like being open to finding where the holes are and being open to fill it. And I think a lot of people are doing that now between GoFundMes, that's not tax advantage giving, but people are still doing it. Supporting small businesses. A lot of people are buying gift certificates to their favorite nail salon or their hairstylist and just maybe buying some gift certificates in advance. That's all giving and all philanthropy, and that counts. And I tell my folks that I work with all the time, that counts. You can check that off. Yes, you're a philanthropist. Just because the IRS isn't involved doesn't mean that you're not properly giving. So my advice is to really be open and find where women really need help. Women, small business owners, women who are nurses, who are maybe your housekeepers, who can't come to work, but you continue to pay them for the month until this is over. Find ways to be creative and help, and don't let the IRS limit your thinking into what giving really is. So that would be my advice to folks and thinking about where to give and how to give.
That is such a beautiful point. I so appreciate that you made that point. It's really about where help is needed. And I'm seeing that in the way that people are pivoting right now. And it's the reason that the nonprofit sector even exists. It is the safety net between where government services fail and where businesses fail, and people fall through the cracks. And it's so vital that we support what people's actual needs are and ask them what their needs are also, not just assume that we know.
That's right.
So I really appreciate that. I love it. So There's really a two-part question that I want to ask you. It's sort of my ending question. The first is, who inspires you? You know, who do you look to for inspiration in times when you just need a little extra push? And then the second part of it is, who is somebody who is also another badass woman that you think that I should interview on this podcast so that other people can hear from her?
Okay, so first, what inspires me? I have a number of sources of inspiration. I can't say that there's one person in particular, but you know, I've been really fortunate in that I have this great network of women friends who I can really rely on, who get me, who understand me for all of my wonderful points about myself and then or about me and all my flaws. They accept me and they hear me and they inspire me and they keep me lifted and buoyed. And I'm really also lucky to say this, that my husband is a huge, huge source of support for me. We met years and years ago. I mean, I can't believe how long it is. And we've kind of grown fused in a way, in a good way. Like people talk about codependency being like a really negative, bad thing, but there's also ways that I think that it's in a world where we're supposed to be so individualistic and stand on your own. I feel really blessed to be able to rely on him, and that he accepts that. And then he relies on me, you know, a lot. And so we've been really good supports for each other as friends, as well as parents and lovers together. And so it's just been a wonderful experience to have him in my life and to be there through all of the ups and downs. And it also kind of goes to show that when people really listen and care, you can understand so much about a person. You don't have to share the exact same experience. He's a man, he's white. He knows me like all aspects of me, you know, and that's a real blessing. So that's a point out there for people to listen to, that, you know, you find that right person, and the right person, whatever they look like or whatever package they come in, they should hear you, whether they look the same as you or not, but they should be able to hear you and love and understand you. So anyway, that's that little romance plug, you know, after February 14th. And then the person that I think the badass woman that I think that you should talk to next. This is a little off the path of maybe what you were thinking, but okay, I don't want to put in your mouth what you were probably, or in your head what you were thinking or what you would say, but I would encourage you to maybe talk to my mother.
Wow, I love this. Unexpected.
Kind of unexpected, huh? I did not expect me to think that either. And it's funny that right when you asked that question, I was thinking she should talk to my mom. Because my mom is a wonderful, really amazing, thoughtful person. And I say that because maybe 35 years ago, as a teenager, I would have completely disagreed with that statement. But my mom is positive, inspirational. She is warm and incredibly thoughtful in a way that's emotional and a good intellectual thinker. And she's a therapist. And so she has this really unique way, I think, of looking at the world that is, like I said, she has a lot of good sort of intellectual contributions to make. But I think especially during this period where we're all feeling a little bit anxious and wary of the uncertainty that's facing us all, you know, individually and as a nation, as a world, she's a real balm to talk to. She has a beautiful way about her. And I think you might appreciate, and your listeners and viewers might appreciate hearing her take on things, or at least not, she may not even say I have a take. It's just how she processes and moves through the world, I think is extremely helpful. So.
I love it. The matriarch of Stephanie's family. This sounds great.
Yeah, she is.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining today and for this conversation. I always love talking with you, and I feel really lucky and honored that I get to share you with the rest of the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. This was really fun, and I really appreciate your great questions and having this discussion.
Great. Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If today's conversation piqued your curiosity, please comment below, review, and share it with your friends and colleagues. And let me know your suggestions for future guests you'd like to hear from. Also, follow me on social media. The links will be in the show notes. And be sure to sign up for my newsletter on my website at www.radafriedman.org. If you want to be inspired, think big, and take action to advance gender equality, then subscribe to this podcast to hear more inspiring stories and tips on how we can close the gender wealth gap. Thanks for listening.